Hello, and if you're in the UK, good afternoon. If you're in other time zones, just hello for now. You are actually now live watching Global Innovation Forum and the hashtag What's Next webinar series. And this is around tapping into the knowledge of our community to better navigate in the current climate of uncertainty. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Morten Bonde, and we're going to hear lots more from Morten shortly. I would just like to add that our next virtual edition in September, where Morten will also be, we are also featuring talks by the Gates Foundation, the Senior Advisor for Innovation, Pfizer, Head of Digital, LinkedIn, Head of Mindfulness, Formula E, Sustainability Director, City of Helsinki, Chief Design Officer, Microsoft Chief Accessibility Officer, and many more. And full details of all of those can be found on GIFLondon.com. My name is Merle Hall. I'm CEO of Kinneir Dufort. We are a user-centered innovation and product development consultancy and have the pleasure to work alongside the GIFLondon team and meet some of these incredible speakers and have the opportunity to talk to them. We're also joined today by Sally from Live Illustration Limited, who will be drawing in the background. Morten has already compared himself to Kojak in Sally's picture, so we're treating that as a moment of self-actualization. But we're here today to talk about self-motivation in times of crisis, something we can all relate on, particularly over the last 12 months. And Morten is Senior Art Director at Lego Agency at Lego, and Morten's a skilled senior art director with over 20 years of experience developing advertising concepts and campaigns. In 2016, his vision was so severely reduced that his life couldn't continue as before. He has had to change his perspective on life, and today Morten has an active career at Lego Group and is a published author, as well as a motivational speaker on self-management and self-motivation, something we all could do with thinking about a little bit more, particularly nowadays, Morten. Morten, welcome. It's great to have you here. Maybe you could kick off by talking through some of the experiences of, and I know from previous conversations we've had of, you know, your time from when you were 29, working in the advertising industry, and you were finding out about these challenges that were going to become a huge part of your life moving forward.
Yeah, let's start there. That's a good place to start. You know, I was diagnosed in 2002 with a rare genetic eye disorder called retinitis pigmentosa, and that causes blindness over years. And well, I was 29 years old, and I was at the beginning of my career and my adult life. My wife and I were planning to have kids and build a house, and I was going to have a career and all that. And then I was sentenced to blindness, and I basically decided to ignore it and just pretend it wasn't there. And I lived my life in a very visually dependent career, and that had some effects, or that really had an impact on my life, because in 2016 I couldn't continue any longer. But I was it turned out that after having this disease for about 14-15 years without realizing or accepting it, I was legally blind. And what does that mean? Because that's very difficult to understand, because when you look at me, you can't really tell that I'm visually impaired. But I have this little test. So imagine that you can see, you can see through a tunnel. So everything you're looking at, you have to sort of scan and put the image together in your mind. So I have an almost normal sight in the center, but then I have no peripheral vision. So yeah, that was a little the short story of the disability that I have.
And I guess from 2002 to 2016, when you were I suppose, for want of a better word, kind of forced to address the situation that you then found yourself in. How much of your time did you spend thinking about it, or did you completely compartmentalize that part of your life away?
Well, I decided to not keep it a secret as such, but I wasn't really telling anyone that or many that it was a sort of a diagnosis that would turn out and end in blindness. So I thought there would be kind of a conflict between being a senior art director, depending very much on your vision, and then having this sort of label on you that you are going to be blind at one point. So I was really, living with it without really accepting that one day there would be, there would come a time where I would have to stop and look at my life and maybe face that I am becoming blind at one point. So the thoughts along the way were kind of very much unconsciously um, developing into this negative inner voice that I had, this dialogue all the time that would comment on things that I would do in everyday situations, and often I was really I was challenged by things because I couldn't see, and I was not really good at asking for help. So every time that happened, I had that inner voice in my head that would kind of say, "Ah, Morten, you're so bad. You can't do anything, and why can't you do this and that?" So that was unconsciously going on for so many years until 16, when I suffered from stress and depression, and I was just miserable, and I lost, I was on a sick leave for a very long time.
So in that year, in 2016, there came that realization that you couldn't continue as you had been. And obviously, that's quite a big leap, isn't it? From sort of that point where you were to actually thinking, how am I going to start asking the questions I need to of myself to move forward? So how did that start to catalyze in your mind and sort of your life?
Yeah, often, we go through life normal. We go through life without too many obstacles in it. And I think the most people will wake up, they go to work, they do the same things, and they do it all over tomorrow, and then the weekend, and then it sort of becomes sort of a straight line. And when you are fortunate, and that sounds weird, when you're fortunate to have a real major bump on your road, you get a second chance to stop and look at your life and look at the person you have become out of habituation, and then take a deep look at that person and say, am I the person that I want to be? Am I happy? Do I want to do something different in my life? Do I want to change some things? And I think that was what happened there, because I was so knocked out of myself, and I was facing this identity crisis. Because what do you do when you lose the most important sense that defines who you think you are? That happened to me because I was faced with the consequences of loss of vision, and I was asking myself, now, who am I really? If I'm not going to be this art director any longer, what am I then? And that was really, really a shock for me to experience that, or feel that the conclusion or the answer to that question was, I will be nobody. Like, I'm nothing if I don't have that. And I think that's when I started looking at myself and say, am I really just all my roles and all my identities? It's very deep, but it really started this chain reaction in me, and I was beginning to research and read and listen to audiobooks and to try to figure out, who am I really?
It's I guess what you're sort of saying, Morten, is what's the new version of me, isn't it? Really, it's what if I can't take for granted the things that I used to, is how do I create that new version, and how do you start to ask, to know what questions to ask of yourself? So how did you go about that journey?
Yeah, I think a lot of things happened. I think there were there was this incident at the municipality office. I write about it in the book, where I feel I probably had a sort of an experience of dying before dying. I think that could be the way to explain it. That I felt that right there when I was talking about early retirement and having this deep feeling of hopelessness and powerlessness, I came to a point where I felt that this is it. Now I could just stop living. Now there's nothing to live for, and when that happened, I sort of felt totally relieved. Like, oh, there was this sort of sigh of relief of coming to that, the end of that identity seeking, and I felt, okay, if I'm still alive after experiencing totally collapse of myself, then I had this new voice that said, what do you want out of life? You're living your life in fear. Now, what if you are not afraid anymore of becoming blind? What would happen then? So that started this really crazy research. I think for almost a year, I just consumed ridiculously many books on spirituality and physics and biology and history and religion and like everything I could get my hands on. So I really started noticing that the Morten I knew was kind of based on all the knowledge he had gained and how he was kind of programmed as a child to become a certain individual. And then I was living that still, and I kind of looked at myself and said, I have the power and the ability to create whatever avatar I want, because I'm something deeper. I'm something that discovers that we have avatars, and that was sort of an eye opener for me. And then I started, doing all this, writing the book, and started talking and speaking, and it's been quite a journey.
There was this incredible journey, almost this thirst for knowledge that you talk about, and how you sort of look to so many different sources for some of that wisdom, and philosophy, ancient religions, all of those things, and so much more. But thinking as well closer to home in terms of the relationships that you had. I remember when we've spoken previously, you talked about a moment where you were feeling very low, and you were talking with your wife, and actually you refer to her in the book as well, and you have this moment where you see what she sees. Would you share with our listeners sort of, and what point that became, what turning point that became?
Yeah, that was the other maybe very important experience that I had that awakened me in a way. My wife is a nurse, and she works weekend shifts, and we live on the countryside. So in 16, I had to stop driving, and I can tell you, if you've been driving your whole life and all of a sudden from one day to the other, you can't do that any longer. You realize how much you are dependent on driving, because the feeling of freedom that comes from just being able to sit in your car and just go wherever you want, that was just taken away. So obviously I had a lot of inner dialogue around how shitty this situation was, and how I couldn't do anything, and I was sitting a whole weekend having those thoughts on my own in my own company. And my wife came home from a whole day of working, and she entered the living room, and I looked at her, and I saw something in her eyes, and that was a mirror or reflection of what she saw in my eyes. And what I saw was total despair and resignation. And it was so clear to me at that moment that I had to do something. I have 2 sons, and I have a lovely wife, and I love them all, and I couldn't continue being this version of myself. So that was also an eye opener into, this is not just impacting me; it's the whole family that is impacted by this, and I have to, teach myself to think new thoughts about becoming blind and seeing it from a different perspective. And that was the beginning of this journey.
Yeah, no, and I think there was there was a lot at the time, wasn't there, which was pushing. You know, there was obviously your very close friend Michael. You know, he passed away. The all the issues that you were dealing with yourself, and to pull yourself out of all of that, Morten, I think really is testament to the strength and the depth of the strength of your personality, but also the depth of the thinking that you undertook to because I think, you know, there was a lot, and it must have been a huge challenge to pull yourself up. And I think I love the approach that you talk about, where you look to the universe really to deliver the wisdom to you, and to start providing some of those answers, and whether that's through the emotional support of your family or that thirst for knowledge that we see. But one of the things you talk about as well in your book, which really fascinated me, was about sort of that depth of understanding of ourselves and how we start to access that. And I think you talk about 95% of our brain being on autopilot, and actually 5% of the time we're really considering what's going on and paying attention, and how you then sort of took that principle and started to train your brain as a result.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and then it's a little bit back to what I talked about, being programmed in your, you know, through your life. So what I learned, and you know, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a researcher, so I just, you know, what I've been doing for so many years as an art director is to translate something very complex. Often, like, you know, a client comes and we have this thing, you know, no one understands it. Can you please, you know, please translate that into a language that people can understand? So I literally did that. What I learned from my research was that most of the time we are basically just, you know, a jukebox playing the same old songs again and again. I found this quote by Marcus Aurelius. He was the Roman emperor 2000 years ago. He said that happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. And I started falling upon quotes about thinking. You know, the everything starts with a thought, and you know, you create the whole world from a thought. And then I started looking at, you know, how is it that if we are always on autopilot, then we will continue do the same things again and again, like getting up in the morning, just take another day and getting up and do that. So I started training myself in being very present in the moment. So mindfulness, meditation was one of the first things I started to do. And what I learned from that was I started looking at my thoughts from a distance, and I was amazed about the things that I was thinking about. And so I started taking control upon that process. And slowly I started implementing mindfulness in my everyday. So it wasn't like 20 minutes sitting on a meditation mat and then be mindful and then go out and be all frantic again. It was about trying to notice what I was thinking during the day by doing, you know, everything with 100% presence. And then I started controlling, or not controlling, that's a bad word. I started to create a collaboration between my way to express things and respond to things. And I realized that often when we say that something is bad, it's just a very quick decision that we make based on all the things that we know and all the biases that we have. So I started experiencing and noticing that if I ground myself in my body, in the moment now, I can actually make a new decision instead of the old decision that I would do. So I started putting more, you know, attention to what I was doing, and thereby I kind of took charge of, you know, the steering wheel of my own life and directed it in the direction that I wanted to go. I in the book I call it, you know, from hopelessness street to possibility road. So I was actually steering away from hopelessness street into possibility road.
I think one of the things I really liked that you talked about, and I know we've discussed as well, is actually moving away from that that sort of common habit that people develop, where they have 20 minutes mindfulness, which they might do first thing in the morning, or meditation, or whatever that practice is, to actually understanding how you can weave it in a more meaningful way through your day and through your life as a whole. And I think that really lends itself to what you talk about with the sort of practical tips in the book, and how you can actually implement different ways of thinking and essentially train your brain. And you talk about that with your 4 challenges across the 4 months, which tie in with what we were discussing around sort of that positivity and negativity. Could you share with our listeners today a little bit about that?
Yeah, just to make this understandable for people, the book is divided into 3 parts. The first one is Hopelessness Street, and that's about how living with this disability and creating this inner dialogue that is almost always negative. The second part is then, okay, you come to a point where you're sick and tired of being a victim. You can't stand it anymore and you want something else. And then the second part is about, okay, what tools are available? What knowledge can we tap into? And then the third part, that will be, the knowledge and the philosophy we obtain or read are worth nothing if we don't implement it in our life. So part 3 is about how can you then live it instead of just think about it and talk about it. So the 4 challenges were about, through repetition and through objectives, how could I create a new mind that would see possibilities in the impossible? That was sort of the challenge I gave myself. So I gave myself 4 challenges that would challenge fear and worry. That was the first challenge. Negativity, that inner negative voice we have all the time. So that was the first challenge. And the second challenge was challenging fear and worry. The third was challenging feeling limited all the time because I was visually impaired. And the fourth challenge was to share this whole journey. So I put myself in a position where I had to during 4 months, implement all the things that I was reading about in my life. And that really shifted a lot of things for me and changed the way that I perceive things.
I think that the first challenge, positivity to negativity, the inner, should I say, from negativity to positivity, that inner voice that we all have. And I think particularly, when we're in times in our lives where we don't feel that we're our best version of ourselves for whatever that reason is, it's often those times, isn't it, that negativity can just envelop and overwhelm people. And I remember reading recently, it was just a couple of sentences, and it said something like, if we had friends that talked to us the same way our inner dialogue does, our inner, sort of thoughts to ourselves, and we wouldn't have them in our lives because they're so toxic, and they can be so, whether it leads to imposter syndrome or whatever it is that's driving that, it can be so damaging, and yet we live with those thoughts and we don't challenge them. And that was why I loved the idea of this changing and training from those negative thoughts to positive, because in many of our cases, we've gone through decades and decades of our lives thinking in that way. So how long did it take to really to actually develop that new way of thinking? And also how do you manage to maintain that?
Yeah, I think it's well, just to make it clear, I think there are some things you need to explain here, because mindfulness is often described as paying attention in the present moment, judgmentally. I think that's John Kabat-Zinn's. I'm maybe paraphrasing it a little bit, but it's often about accepting the isness of this moment. And I was getting really good at that, but then I looked at my life and I said, I want to take this somewhere. So I kind of came up with this little formula that says, you have to observe, and then you have to accept, and then you have to change. So I put that into a challenge. I call it my 30-day stop, swap, thought challenge. And it's kind of a game. And I decided for 1 month to pay attention to the inner dialogue. And every time that my inner voice said, I hate this, or this is stupid, or my life sucks and all that, I had to, within 5 seconds, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I would have to change to a positive conscious thought, and I noticed that there is always a, and another side to the story that you tell yourself if you look for it. So I just started training myself in stopping myself from labeling things, and when I did it, I have to look at it again and say, I decide that this is not so bad after all. When I look at it again, I can actually see an advantage in this, because and then I can start to build myself up and talk about this shitty situation in a positive way, because there was actually a positive side effect to this negative thing that I was experiencing. So I think within a month, I really changed the way that inner dialogue was going on, because I was paying attention to it, like almost like in kindergarten, when the teacher watches the children play and says, you have to talk nicely, Tom, or I did that with my own inner voice.
And do you find now that that is a really natural thought process for you, or do you still have to work at it?
I still have to work. It's very natural for me to delve in the negatives. So I still have to do it. But I think that the amount of time that goes from being very negative about something to kind of ground myself, reboot, and look at it from a different perspective is really much faster now. So I think a lot of the problems I was facing becoming blind were the thoughts about it, not the reality actually. And I think that's very important to remember, from this situation that we are in right now, which can be frustrating. We're all frustrated about being limited. We can't, basically that's my life. Everyone gets to experience my life right now, because I'm also like always being restricted to my home. If I have to go somewhere, I have to take the bus, and that's sometimes not that easy where I live now. So I think it is something you have to keep at for the rest of your life, but it becomes easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, having read the story about mastering fear and what you do as a result, I don't know if I should keep it sort of for the people who read your book, but I really felt like I was actually with you at that point when you were describing it.
Yeah, I think we can. I tell that story often, but I'm afraid of heights, and the second challenge was challenging something that made me fearful and something I would worry about, because I was worrying all the time. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. We try to anticipate the future, or look into the past. We rarely hear right now in this moment. And I was always anticipating something that could go wrong, because if people noticed that I was visually impaired, that would be embarrassing, and what would they think and all that. So I said, okay, something that I hate and I promised never ever to do in my life was to jump from a plane, skydiving. And I said, okay, you have to do that then. If that's something you won't do, then you have to do it. And then I said, okay, within 14 days you have to jump, and you have to notice every time the inner voice starts to talk you out of jumping, and then you have to swap your thoughts and imagine how it would be actually to complete this mission. And I described that very vividly in the book, and it was the morale of this was that things that you fear and worry the most can actually turn out to be life's greatest moments, and that's something we have to remember.
Absolutely. And I think the theme that runs through all of those areas that you're talking around is about challenging yourself, isn't it?
Yep.
Because across all of those and so many more examples in the book, you don't take the easy path. You take the challenging path, but by doing that, there's more vitality and there's more life associated with that, isn't there?
Yeah. It's in the friction that you actually experience life, and you get to know yourself. It's very, and it's almost back to all the, we know all the cliches. You have to, get out of your comfort zone and all that. But it's just words, and it's very easily just I heard about that, and but we rarely do it because it's uncomfortable. So that's why the third challenge was about training myself to feel comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I did something that, is a little weird. I just decided to lie down on the sidewalk in the middle of a populated area and then count to 30 while smiling at the inner dialogue that would say, "Oh no, you can't do this. People will think this and that." So the challenges there are just like symbols. You have to continue doing it. Looking for things that it's very easy to sometimes notice the inner voice saying, "No, you can't do this, and you should do it because this and that." Then look at that voice and say, "Who's talking? Is it fear, or is it my inner? Is there an inner child somewhere that just want to play? Let that child rule." And that's when things start to happen. And it's so, just for me, so so interesting to also work for the Lego Group, where we constantly try to imagine being like children when we come up with ideas. So I tapped into that and just became a child again.
And yeah, I'd like to touch a bit on your work at Lego. And I know you're focused around ideas for new product lines. And one of the creative concepts that Lego obviously developed was Braille bricks. Could you share a bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually a very cool project. I think people can see the bricks here. The Lego Foundation took the regular brick and then transformed it into the Braille alphabet, which is so cool. And I was approached by the Lego Foundation, and they asked if I wanted to be involved in this, because obviously I had a sort of an insight into this topic and this area. So I joined. I still work for the Lego Group and Lego Agency, but I joined as a consultant into, like, what do you think if we do like this? How would that feel for you? So they used sort of the insights that I have in being a visually impaired person, and I think that was just such a great project to be on.
And how have you found sort of work in terms of supporting having that support from your colleagues and the business, and obviously you've been with Lego for a while, a fair while now. So how do you find sort of that on this sort of day to day? And actually, I can imagine working remotely as well. That's probably thrown up even greater challenges.
Yeah, everything is happening on the screen now, and that's a little challenging, because often I'm just confused most of the time when we work on the screen and people say, look at this and look at that, and I just, what's happening? So I think that's been quite challenging, but I also think it's been a little bit of a journey when you change the way you react on things and the way you talk and the way you think, and in a very short amount of time, you kind of, I think people for a while was a little, what is happening? Is he going crazy? Or my children were even asking me if I was, what's going on, Dad? You're such a hippie, you're so positive, what's going on? Like, so I think in the beginning it was a little bit strange for people, but I think everyone has been really, really nice, but I think also it's a little bit difficult. Some people have difficulties in approaching people who are suffering from something or having a disability because of of fear of the reaction. If I go to Morten and say, how is it, with your vision? Oh, would he cry? Would he be angry? Would he? So I think that normal fear of engaging with people who are a little different or who have a disability is difficult for everyone. But in general, I think the Lego Group have supported me, in the best possible way I could have hoped and dreamt for, and they're really also supporting the story that I'm telling. I'm giving these lectures internally at the Lego Group as well, but it's I think it's also the way that you perceive things. So often it can be your own translation of what you hear, and it can turn into a, oh, did he really say that? He must have meant it like this. Or again, you can choose and you can decide what it is that you hear. And so, yeah.
But that was when you with that back to your 4 challenges. That was the 4th challenge that you set yourself to share that story. That started at Lego, didn't it? In terms of that was your first platform.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was the first challenge I gave myself. As I said, in 4 months you have to share this. You have to create a talk and write a book. And I gave the talk, and it was a really good experience. And people were actually surprised because they knew a little bit about something with that, with the vision, and they thought I was going to talk much about that, but I really talked much more about how to overcome things and how to accept the situation that you are in, and then decide to build something from that. And yeah, that was the beginning of it all. Now I've done more than 100 talks.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And but one of the things I like that you talk about in your book as well is the role of humor. Because I also I default into humor, particularly when I'm uncomfortable. But you touch on this in your book as well.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think that's the way you connect to people. So if you can kind of diffuse a tense situation with humor, that's really good. And I often talk about, if people feel uncomfortable when I share that I am visually impaired, I often, pull out a fun little anecdote, and then we laugh about it, and then they see that, I'm not devastated about this. I am accepting it, and I can make fun about it, and it's okay. So in that way, humor can kind of, people sort of get relieved and shoulders fall down, and it's okay to talk about this. So in that way, I think humor is really important.
It feels, doesn't it? There's these juxtapositions because, we talk here at work because a lot of what we do is based in healthcare. So we always say you don't have to be serious to do serious work. And I think there's this expectation, isn't there, that if it's something serious or something negative, then actually, automatically it needs to be treated in a certain way. Whereas all of those factors can actually strengthen. And I think, you talk about this with your without that fear and the negativity, as well as the positivity on the other side of that, you can't see life in its entirety. There isn't that balance, that yin and yang.
Yeah, it is true. And I think one of the things that is often blocking us from living out our potential or seeking in the dream, or whatever you want to phrase it, is fear. And I think it's really taking over a lot of people's lives. So I was asking that question. I was reading a lot of ancient philosophy, and I was reading books that most people would probably say, whoa, that's deep stuff. But what I realized was that if you can somehow create a relationship, like a partnership with the concept fear, and change it into something that every time you feel that you are challenged and you feel fear, and look at it as a opportunity to grow or to take it to something that is positive, then fear becomes this catalyst or springboard to something else. And I think that I was afraid for so many years about becoming blind, and that was really that fear was lying under everything. And then I realized that at one point it's actually fear of death, fear of dying. That fear is it's everywhere. And I think when I had this moment at the municipality office where they can just I don't care, I'm ready to leave this planet. I didn't think about killing myself or anything like that, but I just felt that it was it. Life is over. Then I felt I got a new chance. I got another chance, and I just stopped being afraid of things that I was afraid about before. Speaking in front of people, for instance, would they laugh? Will I be ridiculous? Start enjoying the feeling of maybe failing, like massively, like also going on here. no, what if I don't know what to say? That would be so awesome. Like a moment where everyone would say, ah, that happened to me too. Ah, yeah, and, you know, it happens to everyone. And if you stop being afraid of it, it can't control you anymore. So I think that's some of the things that I experienced, and I'm trying to also convey.
I think it feels, we're starting to see this backlash, aren't we, against this kind of perfect world where people feel this pressure to present this perfect facade of their life and what they feel that should be. And the reality is never what it seems. And, I think you touch on this as well. I always describe it as the perception reality gap. So, it's always your reality, but it's everybody else's perception.
Yeah.
And that kind of so different for everybody. But I think what you did, Morten, moving so far away from that and having that openness, it's so freeing, and getting used to those uncomfortable lying on pavements or whatever that actually represents. It frees you in a way that you could never have probably experienced if you hadn't have been through that journey.
No, that's right. And I think that when I wrote the book, it's very personal. At times I was, really just, openly exposing myself for, all my weaknesses. I was an insecure person. I still am, or at times, but I realized if I expose that secret to everyone, it won't have any power any longer. It's like, then I'm free. You can, that's how it is. I was insecure and I didn't know this, and I was afraid of that. Now I tell it, it has no power anymore. So every time I feel that, I'm just, I just tell about it and tell it to myself. Often it's just, you don't have to tell it to people all the time. You just have to tell it to yourself and write it down. Be very conscious about what is it that is making me not do this right now. Is it because you don't want, or is it because you're afraid of something? And then expose it, let it out, and then it doesn't have power anymore.
Absolutely. And you talk about how thoughts are the language of the brain and emotions are the language of the body. But clearly, in everything that you've done, there's this intrinsic link between the two. And yet they feed from each other, don't they, in terms of how you can actually sort of just tie them together to create this freedom. You have to have both, really. That's how it feels to me. Would you agree?
Yeah. And I think often we are familiar with the language of the brain. That's modern Western people, and I wasn't aware of a language that was in the body. That was what I slowly learned from meditation and mindfulness practice and reading about ancient philosophies. And I started realizing that what is, blocking me from being my best version of myself is that I haven't trained this body to be in alignment with the mind. So the mind was just, I want this and want that, but the body said, no, we're not going to do that. So it was actually in control, the body. So I started noticing that if I can interpret the feelings that are going on, if I can familiarize myself with that language, I can actually create feelings. So I started creating the feeling of something that I wanted to experience in my life, and then it, somehow, manifested into reality. This sounds a little strange when I say it. I can imagine many people thinking, what is he talking about? But I trained myself in having the feeling that I wanted to feel before I even had the experience, and that was something that really got my body in the game. But I'm not 100% there. My project right now is to get even more familiar with what is going on in my system, because that's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've got some great questions coming in, Morten. So I'm going with, this is sort of a slight move on from, but is following a similar theme to what we were just talking about, really. Someone's asking the question, is acceptance a decision or a process? Is it as simple as thinking to oneself, okay, I can do that? That's a question from Maha.
I think, if I understand correctly, I think it's not just thinking and deciding. There has to be, what I learned, what I did for quite some time was that I meditated on things that I would like to change in my life. So I identified, with the thoughts. I said, okay, there's something going on there. And then I started meditating, making maybe mantras. So I would, for instance, the 30 days Stop Drop Thought month, I was meditating on the things that I wanted to happen in my life. So I identified that I was always saying, you're shitty. So I said, okay, you're amazing. So I started meditating on the words that I wanted to define myself. So that's where this is, the language of the body. So I started slowly tapping into the machinery, the chemistry in my system. How can I be the alchemist of my system in a way? So people, I think, often get frustrated or disappointed when they can't change their behavior, and that's where I realized that's where I have to really give myself a huge hug for just wanting to change. And then I have to, every time I felt that I wasn't cutting it, I wasn't doing good, I had to embrace myself and I say, this is a journey I'm on. It's not going to change from one day to the other. So it is habituation, changing mindset over time that will slowly change the language that you experience in the body.
Yeah, and clearly it's something that just requires that continuous sort of focus. And yeah, I mean, it's just hugely impressive how you have made that shift. I'm massively envious, Morten. I would love to take myself on that journey. So you're a great inspiration to do that. We've had a couple of questions around sort of that, and we touched on this, didn't we, in terms of the remote working, but the sort of the physical adjustment. So we've got one attendee today who was saying, my daughter has the same vision issue as you and is in college, and they've been delivering all their classes remotely via computer. It's been really hard and exhausting for her. I'm sure that's something you can empathize with.
Yeah.
And I think, and sort of the other question relating to that was, have you built any tools or any kind of hacked environment around you, to help sort of support that remote working and working from home?
Yeah, I think, I'm still in the infancy of adapting into using all the accessibility tools that are available, because I still have that little tiny people. I'm using that, and I think what I just started doing is to listen to the body. So instead of just continuing, forcing myself to see, I allow myself not to see. So I say, for instance, in a workshop, I would say to my colleagues now, I've been, using my vision for 2 hours. For the next 2 hours, I will only use my ears. And then I explain that to people, and I dare to say that is sort of loss of strength in a way, because I'm saying now I can't cut it any longer. I can't use my eyes. But for 2 hours, I will use my ears only. Let's see what happens, And often I just gain new perspectives on things because I can't see the things that they talk about. I have to listen to their voices. I have to use that other sense. And often I can ask a question that people didn't really think about, because I'm not seeing the things that they are seeing. I'm just hearing it. So I think it just really, again, is important to listen to what the body says. Don't force anything, and then find the way to be, to be able to contribute the way that you can contribute. I think that there are challenges in going to school and adapting the same knowledge than the peers who can use their eyes. It's in a way you have to be sort of superhuman to live as a visually impaired or blind person amongst people who can see. It's like they have a huge benefit there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a question from Max at the Global Innovation Forum, and he asking Morten how to convince disability-free people that they are also disabled, how to identify the disability in all of us. So this is from Anda. So I think, I think that's kind of, I guess, what I was getting at when I was saying about this journey that you've been on. We all have disabilities which are restricting us in some regard. Yeah. And I guess the role that you're now taking is about, how you can make everybody, whether they regard themselves in that way or not, to see what the potential is.
Yeah, I think it's courage is probably a very good word there, because, it starts with thinking about every time that you try to change something about yourself to accommodate other or to please other. I think it's as simple as that, that every time you notice that, I wear a tie today because I'm meeting those kind of people, but I would wear a t-shirt normally. Now, you shouldn't, there's discernment also here. So, but you should notice every time that you try to be someone else or something else than what you feel that you are. And that's when you get comfortable telling that, I can hear on this ear, so you maybe should talk here, or I'm afraid, I feel anxious when I'm around people. And I think the moment you can allow yourself to talk about it and be open about it, that's when you liberate yourself. That's what I felt, at least.
I think one thing I'd love, and I can you feel like I'm putting you on the spot a bit here, Morten, but I'd love to sort of hear what, I guess now, if everything that you've experienced, particularly sort of since 2016 and the last 5 years, if you could have taken yourself back to your 29-year-old self in 2002, what advice would you have given yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you could maybe, some people have asked me, did it have to be so tough? Did it have to be so hard, everything? And I think, yes, it wouldn't have created the person that I am now if I hadn't experienced all those things. And I think in that thought comes gratitude. So even to the miserable situations that I've been in and all the despair and everything, I feel gratitude towards that. And I think that's the greatest advice that you can always, almost get, is to feel gratitude in things. So look for it even, being guided by that feeling that comes from being grateful about things. And even when people, behave in ways that you're not appreciative about, then it reminds you of what you don't want to be. I'm grateful for you being an asshole right now because it tells me something about what I don't want to become. Thank you. Like, that's by the way, that's very fun to do that. People get like, what? Yeah. But
as long as you're not talking about me, Morten, that's fine.
No, I don't know if that's kind of answered the question.
Yeah, I think it's I think I agree with you. I think it did have to be that hard, absolutely, because that friction that you talked about earlier, it feels like I know I'm talking to you here in 1 hour. You've had a lot more time to think about this, but all of the things that you've described, it feels that actually, if you hadn't have challenged yourself in that way, and if you hadn't have taken that more uncompromising route, like you say, you would never, one wouldn't grow in the same way that you have. No. And I think that's a really clear message for the people here with us today, about the value of taking yourself out of your comfort zone, what you can achieve. And, it's that kind of good enough isn't good enough. It's about what's beyond that and how you can really learn and grow.
Yeah, it's right to be grateful about the obstacles that life throws at you and look at them as, opportunities to grow and develop. I think that's I think we will never ever, it's very difficult to decide to take the uncomfortable path in life if we don't have to. And I think that's why people who experience sad things in their life, they kind of can often turn that around to something positive. And I think that's where gratitude comes in.
I have these, what I call them moments of clarity, Morten, where I just have these moments where everything just feels right in the world. I only get one every few years, but they're really, do you know what I'm describing, those moments where it just all feels right? Where has that moment been for you on your journey?
I think there was the municipality office. I think I describe it in the book. I talk also about brainwave stages in the book, where you can take yourself when you meditate, and why it is difficult to change habits because you are in a certain brainwave state in your mind. And I think that at the municipality office, I had what you call a gamma brainwave burst. Like the brain was just after dying, it just, and I could just see so clearly what I had to do. Like this voice was really saying, "What do you want out of life, Morten?" And I had to use a couple of months to understand what was happening there. But after that, I was just looking for opportunities always to grow and to figure out how can I change this blindness thing into something that is my advantage. With that, it's going to be my superpower, and in a way. And that was a huge moment there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got one question, so we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll try and squeeze this in. Morten, I have experienced a coaching education called Positive Intelligence, PQ, run by a Stanford professor, Shazad Kamin. I just finished the 7 weeks experience. He talked about inner saboteurs, which are built by experiences from childhood and influence every day in a negative way. PQ can detect those saboteurs and can develop us to a positive mindset called SAGE. Have you heard about this? It sounds very familiar with what you're talking about.
Yeah, I haven't heard about that specific, but that's where, going all the way back to very ancient philosophy, that was, and I can see that, strings from ancient wisdom sort of goes into modern ways of interpreting it. So there are always people who ask me, "Oh, did you read that book?" I said, "No, but I read a little bit about the Bible, and I went even further back and read about Hermes Trismegistus, and I went really way back, and then I read about science, about the mind and chemistry and biology and all that. So I was really going far."
So it's the ancient wisdom. Fantastic. Morten, thank you so much. I know I'm speaking for everybody who's here with us today. Thank you so much for your openness, your knowledge, your intelligence, and your inspiration. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as I think has popped up, we will have a recording of this available on the YouTube channel tomorrow. So you can also sign up for some of our upcoming webinars, which are also on this week. So thank you, Morten, from all of us here today. And we look forward to hearing more at the Global Innovation Forum later this year.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.